Good evening. How many of you out there trust the government? How many of you out there distrust the government totally and emphatically? How many of you out there think that the U.S. government is involved in an attempt to control every aspect of our lives? Writing all news scripts for CNN and Fox, arresting dissenters and placing them in secret prison camps, putting mind control drugs into our McDonald's hamburgers? How many of you out there are just fucking batshit paranoid to the point of believing that everything not coming from the government is true and that everything the government tells us is bullshit? I have to ask this right out of the gate because at times when I bring up certain topics, I get an earful of how my reasonable assessments are discredited by government cover-ups. Apparently, every piece of evidence offered by official means is just so much garbage and no amount of logic can put it right again. This, in fact, is the only argument that can be given by those who insistently hawk the non-event known as the Philadelphia Experiment. To recap the story for those of you who have lived in a cave for the last 50 years, there was a Navy ship, this ship right here, the U.S. Navy Cannon-class destroyer escort called the USS Eldridge, number DE-173. The story goes that in October, or maybe July of 1943, at the Philadelphia Navy shipyard, an experiment was conducted with this ship involving the creation of some magnetic force field that made the ship invisible. Not just to radar, completely invisible. It was said that thousands of sailors on shore and on another ship, the SS Andrew Furuseth, that was anchored nearby, witnessed this event. Unfortunately, the experiment caused some real bad mojo to the crew on board the Eldridge. Some were burned, others were found dematerialized inside the metal of the ship. Some had bouts of invisibility for the rest of their lives, and others just vanished outright. How many of you out there think this really happened? Well, it didn't. None of it. In fact, not one shred of it happened. Not even a breadcrumb of information anywhere exists to say that any of this happened at all. What did happen was this guy, Carlos Allende, otherwise known as Carl Allen, who some family members report to be rather eccentric and other family members report to be completely off his nut jacko-wacko. As it turns out, this whole thing started when this guy wrote a bunch of crap about this experiment in the side margins of this book about UFOs written by this guy, Mr. Morris Jessup. Now, Carl had a habit of writing in books. Even when he was a kid, he used to run around the house and pull books off the shelves and start writing his scribbling junks and Anyway, this video is going to play in 4/4 time, so watch for the changes and try to keep up. Back on track, this guy sent this book with the notes to these guys, the U.S. Navy's Office of Naval Research. Now, these guys can't take anything as a joke, so they decided to have a glance into the matter. They decided to call this guy into their office to ask if he might know anything. As it just so happened, this guy had been getting weird-ass letters from this guy for a couple of months. And this guy realized that this guy was Looney Tunes from the very beginning and asked him not to send any more letters. But even these guys can't keep their mouths shut. The whacked-out tale made the rounds, and soon it leaked out to all these guys, and voila, it's myth time in the big city. Well, after stewing in the myth pot for another couple of decades, a completed story was written and included in this book by this guy, Mr. Charles Berlitz, who had been in contact with this guy for the real scoop on what happened to this ship. All of this after this guy had already announced publicly that he made the whole thing up. But just to show you that you can't keep a good story down, this book became a blockbuster smash hit with these people. Then along came this guy, Mr. Robert Gorman, who investigated this and found out just how close this guy really was to being fitted for a straitjacket. Here's a question for you. How many of you out there would like to know if the Eldridge was in Philadelphia Harbor during this fantastic event? Well, it wasn't. It went nowhere near Philadelphia any time in 1943. The official logs show it on patrol or other places. A few years back, there were about a dozen surviving crewmen from the Eldridge who were asked about this during a reunion. All of them said the same thing. The ship wasn't there. Nothing happened. And what about the ship Andrew Furseth, from where this guy claims he saw the event? Well, the logs show that it wasn't there either. But all of this hasn't stopped people like this guy, a garage mechanic by the name of Al Bellick, from claiming he was actually part of this thing. He's not alone. Others have made witness claims and all have been shown to be fabrications. But all that doesn't matter. As long as there are stories like this around, there'll always be people like these guys ready and willing to believe them.